My name's Eric, owner of Eric C. Jackson Studio. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm going to dive a little bit into my editing process. And the first thing that I do when I just come to the desk is that I turn down the brightness on my monitor. Because a lot of times, if you are printing out photography work and the prints come back darker than you expected, then that might mean that, or probably means that the brightness on your monitor is too bright. So since I'm working from the iPad Pro, I just bring down the drop down menu. Here's my brightness. Now normally my brightness is up here, right? When I'm just using the iPad Pro. But when it's time for me to edit photography, I just slide the brightness down to right about here. And that's going to be the level of brightness that the photograph is going to print at, right? That's going to mimic what the photograph is going to print like. So um, mainly because the paper is not projecting light, right? So when we're looking at our monitors are projecting more light than is actually going to be there in the photograph. So I always, turn that down. I suggest that for everyone to turn their monitors down to a lower setting before you start working on photography, editing photography. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. These are the images that I have on the cloud. And this is the one that I just worked on um, earlier today. Okay, so unfortunately, you guys can't see the Apple Pencil that I use, but what I do want to pick out is just the layers and how this is, right? Because it's basically the foundation starts at the bottom and then I just build up on top, right? So I can turn off the signature, turn off levels, turn off the dodge and burn. So basically, here is my smart object, right? You see the little icon next to it. You notice that this one is the same as a copy, but it doesn't have the little icon. This is your smart object here, right? That's this layer. So that's your original that you're shooting, you're capturing photography in RAW. That's the raw file. That's your digital negative. It's gonna hold as much information that you can possibly have. Um, Once you flatten the file, the raw file is going to turn into a rasterized file, right? So once you rasterize it, it's going to flatten it. Um, but that's the only way that you'll be able to dodge and burn your photography is through a rasterized or flattened file, unfortunately. I don't think that you can dodge and burn on a smart file. But this is a smart file. That's where you start. Now, for me, the next thing that I do once I bring this in, my monitors the brightness of the monitor is already low. I'm looking at composition, right? And that's why I selected this photograph in the first place is because I love the composition. But first thing I do is it's too dark, right? So I start on the levels. So right now, if you look down at the blacks, right? So your blacks start here, your whites start here on this line, and then your midtones are all in the middle, right? And so now this is congested. So you see all these little peaks and valleys, like this little silhouette of a mountain. That's where all your information is in the photograph, right? So on this side, like I said, this is your blacks. Over on here, it starts like you see a little bit of this starting to come up higher. That's where your whites start. This right here, that's completely flat. there is no information. And that basically means that the photograph is pretty dark or underexposed, right? So you can just slide over your highlights until you start getting some brightness in here, right? So I slid it over to 128. Then the midtones, uh, I slid it down a little bit. Instead of 1.00, I slid it down to 0.90. So slightly move that number down. And then the shadows, everything's dark enough already, and so I didn't want to bring the shadows up. But I can turn it back on now. So that's what I've got out of it. So now here's my whites or your highlights, right? Your midtones is pretty much anything in the middle. Anything in the middle. It's not super white like a highlight, but it's not really dark like shadows. It's all the information that's in the middle, which is why on this little mountain silhouette, you've got a lot of information here in the middle because that's all your midtones, right? Um, so yeah, so that's what I do next. Here's my raw file or the smart file, and then I add on the levels, and you just play around with that until you get the numbers to where you want them to be. Now this is a good start, right? But the thing I don't like is it's still a little bit flat, overall. And so what I do, I come over here. These are your adjustment tools, some of them, right? So here's your dodge. Your dodge is for your highlights and your midtones. The burn is for your shadows, but you can also use it for midtones, right? Um, you can also do dodge and burn on your shadows, like for everything. But for me, I basically, because this will brighten up everything. Your burn is going to darken up everything. So if you actually want to darken your highlights in certain sections of the photograph, you can do that by burning your highlights. But usually, I reserve the burning for the shadows, midtones, and then the dodge. I reserve that for the highlights and the midtones. But if you come up here to these little three dots, there's your options. They're all there, right? And of course, this is on the iPad, so the user interface is going to be different from how it is on if you use Photoshop on the laptop or a desktop. And then up here on the iPad Pro, there's no navigation bar, so that's a bummer. But like I said, you'll notice that quite a few of the features are missing. So on the iPad Pro, like you'll get messages like this feature isn't supported on mobile devices yet. They are slowly, very slowly, but surely adding options on the iPad Pro. So here they recently added a couple of options here for FX, which is the stroke and the drop shadow, but that's really not a lot of features there. Um, and also, as far as features go, you have the three dots here. They're adding features to this menu as well. I think the flatten and the merge are still not available. The merge down, but like I said, slowly but surely they're adding options there. And then there is this option here. It's like a box with a plus sign in it. You have a few more options in here to choose from. But for me, I usually go adjustment layer to get to the levels. Um, you have some options in here. But if you're familiar with Photoshop, there's definitely like quite a few options that are missing. And then I guess to wrap that part up, as far as options, you got the document info is here. So the native file size for me for my camera is like a 12 by 18. It'll be 18 inches wide, 12 inches high, and then you keep the resolution up at 300 dpi unless you can drop it down probably to like 72 dpi if you want to share the images on the web. Instagram, social media, that type of stuff. So you can change it with the image size, and there's all of your normal options here if you want to resize it. So there's that. Okay, so now as far as the editing goes, this is for the dodge and burn layer. Once you start dodging or burning on the photograph, it's going to automatically tell you that you can't dodge and burn or burn on a smart file, which is this here. You just can't. So it's going to duplicate the smart file and then create this file here, right? And then you're able to dodge and burn on that. So when I turn this file on, there's all of my edits. So as you can see, I added some shadow in here, some shadow in here, and then the highlights, I kind of made them a little bit lighter, but not by much. See, so that's off, that's on, off, on. So it's just like painting. That's how I approach it, right? I approach it just by painting it. Now, as far as your brush size, you can come here. There's all your settings there. This is the hardness, which I leave it at 0 because I want the brush to be really soft. The exposure, I leave it at 50% because I don't want like uh, the flow to be like too much, so I kind of hold that back a little bit, keep it at 50 out of 100. And then your brush size is up here. Um, and you can just slide this option. You just slide it up and down. It gets really big, but you can either move this with the pencil or your finger, since it is the iPad with the touchscreen. Um, but that's what you adjust it with. So that's pretty much for any type of brushes. Dodging, burning, the regular paintbrush. You do also have the mask over here for the levels. So if you want to mask anything off, you use just a regular brush here, and then you have the same options, right? But that's basically it, right? So those are my three layers I have. I don't do a lot of compositing with my work. Um, and if you do want to have some composites, I would suggest you can start editing on here on the iPad, move it, keep it on the cloud, and then you can switch to your laptop or your desktop, open a file off the cloud, and then do all your compositing from there, because the iPad tends to freeze or stall, or sometimes it can outright crash on you, even though you have the internal part of the iPad Pro. I mean, it's really beefy, right? Like the 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU. I've got 16 gigabytes of RAM. It's the M1 M1 chip from Apple. So it's really beefy as far as the power on the tablet, but for some reason it doesn't handle like just heavy editing very well. It will definitely crash on you, or at least freeze, like if you push it too much. But for what I'm doing over here, as far as the levels, dodging and burning, the size of the file isn't that big, right? It's a 12 by 18 really. So I didn't enlarge it. But if you're working with a massive file, and I can blow up my files to like 40 inches by 60 inches, which is 60 inches is like 5 feet. So I don't work with that size file on the iPad. I would definitely do that on the desktop or laptop version. But then the last thing that I do, and this is why I have my brush on 13 as far as the brush size, is I write my signature with the Apple Pencil, which is awesome because It's just more natural. It's really natural. Um, so it's really easy for me to edit, like just the feel of editing and painting on the adjustments, exactly where I want them, being able to paint directly on the screen. That's why I love to edit on the iPad Pro. But like I said, it is limited because, as you can see, this is a just this version of Photoshop is not great on here. You just don't have the full version. I would say a good, gosh, 60% of the options, the features on here are not available. So that's really the downside of it. But I can't use the Apple Pencil on the Mac Mini, or the if I had like a MacBook Pro. I don't think I could use the Apple Pencil on there either. So it's just for the iPad, um, as far as using the Apple Pencil. But other than that, now if you want to save this on the iPad, then here's your button up here for that. You can publish this. You can do a quick export. So those features are available. But other than that, like this is letting you know, this little icon that it's on the cloud. Once I'm finished, I just make sure that everything is where I want it to be. Now, once you're done and you want to look around at the photograph just to make sure you didn't miss anything, come over here and click on your move tool, because your finger can actually mark the photograph. So don't leave it on the brush tool or the dodge and burn tool, because you'll definitely change the file. Um, you definitely will. So yeah, always use the move tool, and then you can come in here and look at the file, look at the photograph, and make sure there's nothing crazy. Now, all these little blemishes, I can see them better from my 27-inch monitor. I like to change everything from there. But yeah, I see like this little spot here. That's definitely a little mark on the camera sensor. Now, if you're impatient and you don't want to wait, here's your spot healing tool. Spot healing brushes here. Um, yeah, spot healing brush, clone stamp. Those things are here. But for me, I just use the spot healing. And then there's your brush size. There's the hardness. And then use pressure for size, sample all layers, that type thing. So you just come in here, you change it. Okay, so I'm gonna turn on sample all layers, and I'm gonna click this one here. There it is. That's better. Now it's going. Yeah, so just make sure that your sample all layers is on. But definitely, like I said, you can move it around while you have the other tools selected. Like you can move the photo around. But I'm just saying be careful, because sometimes the iPad will think you're trying to mark something, because you can mark all this stuff with your fingers. Yeah, so you can just move your fingers around over it. But I don't suggest you do that. I just try to use the trackpad and mark the area. And so that's better. But yeah, just look for any spots. Now, the thing I don't like about working with the healing brush on the iPad is because you're touching the screen. It's easier to touch the screen to move everything around, but you're touching the screen. So now your fingerprints are on the screen. Any type of dust you have on your hand, that'll end up on the screen. And so you think the dust will be on the photo, but it's really not. So I just end up doing all the cleanup stuff on the desktops because I'm not touching the monitor when I'm using the desktop. But yeah, that is finished. I like it. Now, as far as test prints, I would say go 4x6. I like to use a Fuji Pearl because it's inexpensive, but it's still a high quality paper. It's the only thing is it's gonna Fuji Pearl is going to print darker than the other paper types I like to use. So you have to keep that in mind. The other thing too, I would say like if your prints come out right on the Fuji Pearl, it's gonna come out right on everything else. Um, if on the Fuji Pearl it could the your photography prints darker, get it to a decent spot, right? Because most of the time I'm going to use the Fuji Flex paper, which is different. The Fuji Flex is going to print lighter, the colors are going to be more vibrant. So just make sure that you don't over brighten or overcompensate, right? In terms of brightness, but some papers they do print darker. Um, what you can do is order print samples from the printer from the photo lab. They usually send you samples for free, or it can be $5 to $10 depending on what you order. Shipping is usually very inexpensive, or they'll just have you pay for the shipping and that's it. And the samples are free. They have plenty of samples, but order the samples and see how the work prints out on different papers because they're only going to send you one like sample art piece artwork, and that same artwork is going to be printed on multiple paper types. And so you'll have the same artwork, but you'll notice that it prints differently depending on what the paper type is. So it's just some paper, like just the ink sits on it, and it's going to be darker than normal, right? So you just have to figure out what type of paper you want to print on, um, and that's a whole different. That's a completely different podcast. There, it just is. But for this one, I'm finished, and once I got the signature on there, I just come back to the home button, and it will load onto the cloud. So here's your little cloud button up here that'll let you know that you're online. Now you will get an error if it's not in sync with the cloud, but everything looks fine right now. This is just loading whatever your updates are to the cloud. I will say do not keep your work on the cloud permanently. I would not suggest that. Now, I know plenty of people suggest that, but I wouldn't suggest that because if someone hacks into the server, even with all the security protections the server usually has, then people have access to your work, whether it's photography or graphic design or videos or whatever it may be. Um, and they don't even have to be local. It can be on the other side of the world, and they can have access to your photography or whatever your work is. And so I always use the cloud as a temporary place to store my work when I'm moving back and forth between the iPad Pro and desktop or laptop. But then once I'm done, I save it to the hard drive or an external hard drive, and I remove the work from the cloud. That's just what I do. Now, for that, you have your little three buttons here. You just click, there's a drop down menu, and you come down here to delete, and it's gone. Now, even when you delete it from this menu, it's not completely or permanently deleted. You come to the deleted folder, and you'll see a bunch of files here. Now, after 30 days, then they'll permanently delete on their own. They'll just start deleting out. But if you want them gone right away, then you just come here. Either you can restore it as well, or just go permanently delete. It's going to warn you again about that. And there you go. Now, of course, before you delete something, you make sure you save it to something else, right? One of your hard drives, external or internal hard drives. So yeah, these are all the things I worked on and finished, or I just got frustrated with, and I just was like, start over. But yeah, so yeah, that's basically what I do. This is the other file that I'm working on. Well, actually, these two. This is the same file, but as you can see, I don't know exactly how I want to edit it. So I have different versions of this right now. Now this one, I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence. I'm definitely on the fence. I didn't do any dodging and burning with this one, so this is still the smart file. I did improve, do some, make some improvements with the levels slightly, and then of course this is my signature at the bottom. But there are some things that I'm not sure I want to change on this. As far as like, I probably want to punch up the shadows, but I'm not sure to what degree. So I'm definitely on the fence with this one. The other thing is on the iPad, when you make changes, there's no history panel, right? So you can jump between different edits. You only have the forward and the back button up here, which is annoying, I know. So you really have to keep track of the edits that you made until it gets grayed out. That's the beginning, and then everything else goes forward, right? Um, but I haven't found a history panel. I don't know if they've added a history panel yet to the interface, but as far as I know, there is no history panel yet. So once you make changes, it's going to auto save, and then if you auto save by mistake, you're going to have to go to adobe.com, look at this particular file, and go back to a previous version because they'll have timestamps there of versions of that file. You'll see it in the menu. So that's annoying to go through. So just be careful with that part, which is why I bring a file over to the iPad, I make the edits that I want, and then I go back to the menu, um, and I finish my corrections on the desktop, and I save it, on the desktop, or on an external hard drive, and remove, like I say, remove stuff from the cloud because, oh my goodness, like saving on the desktop is a lot less hectic, I guess, or chaotic. Like you don't have to remember where you were. There is a history panel. There is the full version of Photoshop is there, so you have more features. I just use the iPad for the basic stuff to get the lighting, the dodging and burning in the right place. I add my signature, and then I can still bring it over to the desktop and work on more edits. Um, but yeah, so I showed you guys the deleted folder. This is for collaborations. If you're collaborating with another artist, um, all this stuff is on the cloud, of course, right? And then here's Discover, and I think this is all work that's being done on the iPad. I believe it is, which this is impressive considering the limitations that are on here. And then there's the Learn tab, hands-on tutorials, which is really helpful to figure out how the user interface works, what you can and can't do on the iPad Pro. And then they usually tell you like, okay, this next part of the tutorial you'll have to, or of an idea, a concept you'll have to switch it over to your MacBook or to your Mac Mini, um, whatever you're using. Now, if you're on PC, yes, you do have access to this cloud, to all your files, because I used to do that before. But it's 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 about the same. The only thing is that the files read differently. Like if I created XMP file on the PC, my Mac cannot read that file from Windows. So that's why I ended up upgrading, because all of my old work, like for instance, I have this file here. This I created on the PC. The Apple products or Apple hardware cannot read the XMP file that has all the editing information on it. So when I started opening up the old files in Apple, it read them just as the raw original file with no edits on it whatsoever. So I had to find a workaround with that. So now I'm at the point where my new work, everything's going to be on the Apple hardware. So I'm not going to have to deal with that situation. But I think that's all I have. I think that's all I have. And then with this one, yeah, see, there's the dodge and burn that I tried. And that's the original. And then this is without the levels. So you see how flat it is in gray. It's like a gray tone to it. So again, I started with, here's the smart file. Then I work on it with the levels and I'm like, okay, that's all right. And then I start working with the dodge and burn. So in here, it's like kick up the highlights. Over here, you deepen the shadows a little bit. But again, it's really like painting. It's like painting where I want the highlights to be, where I want more shadows, especially in here in this area. But it still doesn't look quite right to me. So I don't know where I'm going to go with this just yet. I really don't know. All right, so I'm back to the default where I started. But yeah, that's it. And again, this little blue dot is just letting you know that it's going to sync to the cloud. And then once you get to your desktop, laptop, it's going to be there. It's all the information is there. Now, another problem that I thought of with the Apple, not with the iPad Pro, is the calibration. I don't believe it's Kelvin verified. I don't know what the delta number is as far as color accuracy. I don't. I do think there's a way to calibrate the monitor, but the device that I saw during my research is very expensive for that calibrator. So I already have a calibrator. The X-Rite calibrator that I do have, it does not work on the iPad. So I don't do that type of calibration with the iPad monitor. I just keep my main 27-inch monitor calibrated. And I know the delta number, all that is Kelvin verified. I know I have all the information for the main monitor that I use, the 27-inch monitor I use. But yeah, there's a little bit of a drawback there too, because with the 27-inch, I can't get the brightness down this low, and then I can't use the Apple Pencil for editing or writing my signature. So there's just a back and forth with that. It's a little it's better, but there's a back and forth with it still that I was trying to get away from. But anyway, if you guys have any questions or any specific subjects with photography that you want me to get into on the technical side of it, as far as like camera settings, I'm not very technical. I'm technical enough, But as far as the feel, the look of the photography, I go by feel more than anything else. And then if I need to change a setting, I know what to change. But I don't go by half stop, fourth of a stop, a full stop, and then make my adjustments accordingly. As far as changing the shutter speed, I do everything by feel, right? And then if I change something, I know the other camera settings that I need to change. Like if I change the shutter speed, then I know, okay, I'm gonna have to change the aperture, right? Or the ISO, or both, right? So I know that part of it. But there are photographers out there who have like a diagram, or like just a printout of the exact um, settings. As far as if you change your aperture, this is how you change your shutter speed, right? Your ISO, that type of thing. Like they have the exact numbers. And I don't go by those exact numbers. I go by how I want the photograph to feel, right? So if my aperture is at 5.6, that means that I want a really pretty shallow depth of field with but some sharpness to it, right? And then I just change my shutter speed and my ISO accordingly, right? So it's just, I just go by how I want the photograph to look, and go by that. So I can make little tweaks um to the camera settings that kind of break the rules, but I know how the three work together. So that's the main thing that I'm sharing with you guys. And for me at this point, it's more so about composition of the photograph. So again, that's all that I have for right now, and I hope you guys got something out of it. Um, Everyone, take care. God bless.